local time, a UAE Rafale F-4 fighter released 2 Black Shaheen cruise missiles over the southern Persian Gulf, turned hard to port, and was 40 miles south before either missile found its target. The pilot never saw the explosion. He didn't need to. The fireball over Karg Island was visible from space. Shift 280 miles northwest to Lavin Island, where an IRGC radar technician had been staring at the same empty sweep for 6 hours. His screen changed at 0314. Not dramatically. Not with the wall of contacts that appears in every Iranian air defense training simulation. Just a faint smear at the edge of his detection envelope, low and fast, hugging the surface of the Gulf like it was afraid of the sky. He reached for his headset. By the time the call connected, the smear had become 8 contacts. Then 12. Then it was too late to count. Shift 220 miles southeast to inside the structure. Published range, 250 miles. Cruise speed, 600 miles per hour. Roughly the cruising speed of a commercial airliner, but at an altitude of 100 to 150 feet, low enough to hide inside the radar shadow of the ocean itself. Unit cost, approximately $3 million per missile. 14 missiles in the air. Total munitions cost, $42 million. The infrastructure they were aimed at, the Karg Island Oil Terminal Complex, pumps 90% of Iran's crude oil exports and generates an estimated $1.5 billion of revenue every single week. 14 missiles, 1 island. The entire arithmetic of the Iranian economy. The 8th aircraft, the electronic warfare variant, carried no missiles. It carried something more expensive. A suite of jamming pods and radar suppression systems whose combined classified cost the UAE has never disclosed, doing a job the missiles could not do for themselves. Shift 1,200 miles west to Washington. The president's public statement had come 62 hours earlier, delivered on the South Lawn with the controlled informality that his communications team had studied and replicated across 4 years. He told the reporters that Tehran had 72 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to international inspection or, quote, they were next. Every analyst in every capital assumed he meant American B-2 bombers. Every analyst assumed he meant Diego Garcia. The assumption was reasonable. It was also completely wrong. What the Iranian Supreme National Security Council did not know was that the operation had been designed from the beginning to be deniable in its first 48 hours. American satellite cueing, Israeli electronic warfare data, French missiles, Emirati pilots. All of it fused over a private encrypted link that Iran had been told about by 3 different intelligence agencies over the past 6 years and had declined to believe existed because believing it existed required believing that Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, and Tel Aviv were coordinating military operations with real-time American ISR support, and that was the kind of thing that happened in American thrillers, not in the actual Gulf. The Iranians were about to discover that the thriller had already been greenlit. Shift to Karg Island itself. The island is a coral outcrop 16 miles off the Iranian mainland in the northern Persian Gulf, barely 5 miles long and 2 miles wide, unremarkable in every geographic sense except one. Beneath its surface and extending into the Gulf around it runs the largest crude oil export infrastructure on the planet. 2 primary terminals, T-Jetty on the northern face and Sea Island on the western approach, can berth 14 supertankers simultaneously. On an average operating night, roughly $200 million of crude is moving through the pipes at any moment. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard had spent 3 weeks reinforcing the island's air defenses after the Trump statement. A full S-300 PMU-2 battery, the Russian-built long-range system with a published engagement range of 90 miles, had been repositioned to the eastern ridge. A Bavar 373 battery, Iran's domestically produced answer to the S-300, claiming a detection range of 160 miles against conventional aircraft, had come down from Bushehr by barge 5 days earlier. The crews were fresh. The radar was on. The missiles were cold-launched ready. The entire defensive orientation was pointed west and northwest, toward Qatar, toward Bahrain, toward the American presence at Al Udeid. The missiles were coming from the south. Shift to the lead aircraft, callsign Falcon 1. The pilot, a UAE Air Force colonel with 18 years on fast jets and more than 3,000 flight hours, watched his targeting display update from an E-7 Wedgetail airborne early warning aircraft orbiting 180 miles back over Saudi airspace. 2 release points programmed. Alpha at 90 miles, Bravo at 75 miles as a fallback if Alpha produced any anomaly. The colonel reached Alpha at 0311. No anomaly. He squeezed the release. 2 Black Shaheens dropped from the centerline and wing stations, their turbojet engines igniting in sequence, and both missiles leveled off at 120 feet above the Gulf and accelerated to 600 miles per hour before he had finished his turn. Shift to the missile. The Scalp EG navigates its cruise phase using a combination of GPS, inertial guidance, and terrain reference navigation that compares radar returns to a digital terrain map stored in the weapon's memory. In the final 10 seconds of flight, an infrared imaging seeker activates, searches for the target shape it was programmed to recognize, locks, and steers itself to within a meter of the designated aim point. The broach warhead is a two-stage design. The first charge, a precursor-shaped charge, punches a hole through hardened concrete or steel. The main charge follows through the hole and detonates inside. The Iranians had reinforced the terminal rooftops. The broach was built for reinforced rooftops. The engineers who designed the reinforcement and the engineers who designed the warhead had apparently read each other's manuals. Only one team had updated theirs more recently. Falcon 2 released at 0312 and 30 seconds. 3 through 7 followed at 90-second intervals. The electronic warfare Rafale held its position 85 miles from the island, jamming pods active, its crew watching the IRGC radar signatures on their threat receivers and pressing on every frequency the Bavar 373 and the S-300 relied on to pass targeting data to their interceptors. Shift to the Bavar 373 battery on the northern rim of the island. The battery commander, a brigadier general of the IRGC Aerospace Force who had written his doctoral thesis on cruise missile defense doctrine, was the first Iranian officer on Karg to see a confirmed contact. His radar operator painted the first missile at 22 miles, low and fast, approaching from the south-southeast. The brigadier ordered 2 Sayyad 4 interceptors launched. The Sayyad 4 is Iran's domestically produced long-range surface-to-air interceptor. With a published range of 120 miles and a claimed success rate Iranian state media has described as outstanding. Each missile costs the IRGC approximately $1 million to produce. The first Sayyad left the rail at 0317 and 14 seconds. It climbed nosed over, went active on its radar seeker, and found nothing. The jammer pod on the electronic warfare Rafale, 85 miles south, had pressed the Sayyad 4's seeker frequency with enough power to salt the target picture into white noise. The second Sayyad launched 4 seconds later. It found the same white noise. Both interceptors reached the end of their kinematic range and self-destructed over the northern Gulf. $2 million. 0 results. Somewhere in a defense contractor boardroom, the export license application was already being drafted. Shift to the S-300 battery on the eastern ridge. The battery commander had 448 N6E2 interceptors ready when his radar operator called out the multiple low contacts from the south. The 48 N6E2 is a formidable weapon against aircraft. It accelerates to Mach 6, 6 times the speed of sound, climbs to 90,000 feet on its intercept trajectory, and noses over onto its target with enough kinetic energy to destroy any aircraft it can reach. Against a cruise missile flying 120 feet above the Gulf surface, masked by the radar shadow of the island's own geography for the first 18 miles of its approach, the geometry is deeply unfavorable. The radar cannot see the target until it is close. When the target is close, the engagement window is measured in seconds. 3 of the 448 N6E2 interceptors flew their full range and self-destructed over open water. The fourth achieved a partial lock and proximity fused 60 feet from the fourth inbound scalp, shredding its tail section with fragmentation. The damaged missile veered, clipped the surface of the Gulf at 600 miles per hour, and cartwheeled apart 600 yards short of T-jetty. Cost of the successful intercept, approximately $4 million. Cost of the missile destroyed, approximately $3 million. Iran had spent $4 million to stop a $3 million missile. The math was not going to improve. Missiles 1, 2, and 3 had already hit. The first scalp came in from the south at 120 feet, popped up to 380 feet at the 3-mile mark, tipped over, and drove the broach warhead through the top of the central crude distribution manifold of T-jetty. The precursor charge opened a 14-inch hole through 4 feet of reinforced concrete. The main charge detonated inside the primary header, where 40 distinct pipelines converge before oil moves to the loading arms. The explosion tore through the manifold in 3 directions simultaneously. Burning crude began venting at an estimated 35,000 barrels per hour through ruptured lines. 4 seconds. The second missile hit Sea Island. 6 seconds. The third hit the island's main electrical substation, cutting power to every pump, every valve actuator, and every radar system on the island simultaneously. The fires that started in the first 10 seconds of the strike would make independent shutdown of anything on the island essentially irrelevant. Shift to the mainland, to the command center at Geneva, 30 miles from the Karg coast. The general watching the threat board ordered every available fighter scrambled from Bushehr Air Base, 80 miles to the north. 4 F-4E Phantom aircraft, American-built airframes delivered to Iran in 1974 and maintained through decades of sanctions by a combination of ingenuity, Iranian manufacturing, and creative interpretation of spare parts acquisition, began taxiing at 0319. The lead aircraft rotated at 0323. By 0323 and 45 seconds, the last of the 14 missiles had already found its target. Shift to the storage farm at the center of the island. 12 above-ground storage tanks, each rated at 1 million barrels of crude. Missiles 9 and 10 were assigned to the farm. Missile 9 hit Tank 3. Tank 3 ruptured catastrophically, spraying burning crude across the berm walls and into Tank 4. Tank 4's emergency pressure valve failed under thermal load and vented burning vapor across Tank 5. The chain reaction took 4 minutes and 17 seconds to involve all 12 tanks. The fireball reached 22,000 feet. The glow was photographed from a commercial aircraft over Bahrain, 190 miles away, by a passenger with a window seat who posted the image before landing. Shift 180 miles southwest to Doha, where an American satellite ground station operator had been filing routine nighttime Gulf imagery and suddenly found herself looking at a photograph with the luminosity values of a midday sun in the middle of what her system clock said was pre-dawn. She flagged it. The flag went up the chain. The chain reached Washington at 0341 Eastern Time. Shift to Al Dhafra, where Falcon 1 was already on final approach. The colonel touched down at 0349 local time, taxied to the apron, and cut engines. The crew chief climbed the boarding ladder. The colonel's helmet came off. Whatever he said to the crew chief remembered it for years. Behind him, Falcons 2 through 8 landed in sequence. 8 aircraft, 0 losses. 0 sustained radar locks by Iranian air defense. The electronic warfare Rafale had suppressed every guidance frequency the IRGC batteries relied on for the entire duration of the engagement window. Iran had fired 6 interceptors across 2 different battery types. Iran had achieved 1 partial hit on a missile it still failed to destroy. The score, in the language of air defense attrition mathematics, was not a score Iran would want to publish. Shift to Tehran, to the Supreme National Security Council convening in emergency session at 0400 local time. The deputy commander of the IRGC Aerospace Force was attempting to explain how a country with no stealth aircraft, no fifth-generation fighters, and no aircraft carriers had just eliminated 90% of Iran's crude export capacity in under 12 minutes. The honest explanation required acknowledging 20 years of assumptions that had turned out to be incorrect. The assumption that the UAE would not act unilaterally. The assumption that no Gulf state had integrated targeting architecture with American satellites and Israeli electronic warfare at the operational level. The assumption that the S-300, a system designed by the Soviet Union to defeat American bombers at altitude, would perform adequately against French cruise missiles at 120 feet. None of the assumptions had survived contact with the morning. The deputy commander explained it badly, which was understandable, because there was no good way to explain it. Iran's options had narrowed to a point that made a narrow corridor feel spacious. Closing the Strait of Hormuz would trigger immediate military response from 3 Gulf states and the United States. Striking Al Dhafra directly meant striking a base with 3,500 American personnel, which was a different conversation entirely. Absorbing the strike and doing nothing meant absorbing the loss of $1.5 billion per week in export revenue with no clear timeline for restoration. Initial engineering assessments put the T-Jetty and Sea Island repair timeline at 16 to 20 months. Total projected revenue loss over that period, approximately $96 to $120 billion. The total cost to the UAE for the operation, including aircraft fuel, crew hours, missile expenditure, and electronic warfare system use, came to roughly $52 million. Iran had just received the most expensive invoice in the history of the Persian Gulf, billed by a country that was not supposed to send invoices. Shift to Karg Island at 0600 local time, as the sun came up over a column of black smoke 24,000 feet tall. Both jetties were structurally collapsed. The central manifold was a crater. The storage farm was still burning and would continue burning for 11 days. The island's water desalination system, hit in the third wave, was destroyed. The 1,800 civilian workers who operated the terminal had been evacuating since the first explosion and were now being pulled off the island by every available vessel the mainland could dispatch. The Revolutionary Guard detachment that had been positioned to defend the island was already gone. They had left in the first 10 minutes, which, given the circumstances, was arguably the most tactically sound decision made by any Iranian military unit that night. At 0412 Eastern Time, the note from Washington had arrived in Tehran through back channels. The message was 4 sentences. 3 of them were diplomatic language about de-escalation and international law. The 4th sentence said the next operation would not be structured for deniability. Iran had it for 19 minutes before the Supreme Leader's office confirmed receipt. The Iranians read all 4 sentences. The 4th one was the one that mattered. Somewhere in the Gulf, the fires on Karg Island kept burning. The supertankers that had been waiting at anchor for their loading appointments turned south and began the long voyage to alternative terminals. The Iranian economy recalculated in real time. The Rafale pilots slept. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other video on Iran's Bavar 373 air defense system and why its designers never planned for this. Bye for now. At 0647 local time, 60 Iranian boats enter the water. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower does not know this yet. She is moving at 5 knots through the Strait of Hormuz, 1,092 feet of nuclear-powered aircraft carrier threading the narrowest choke point on Earth. Built at a cost of $4.5 billion in today's money. Carrying 44F divided by a -18E and F Super Hornets at $67 million each, 5EA, 18G Growler electronic warfare jets at $68 million each, 2 nuclear reactors that will not need refueling for 20 years, and 5,000 sailors who are currently doing exactly what they were trained to do inside a corridor 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. The shipping lanes compress that to roughly 6 miles of navigable channel. A carrier strike group threading those lanes is the naval equivalent of driving a freight train through a revolving door. 11 nautical miles northeast of the carrier's projected track, at a sun-bleached concrete pier in Bandar Jazz, the boats are already moving. They left in pairs beginning at 0620 local time. A mix of Iranian-built PACAP-class fast inshore attack craft, 46 feet long, twin diesel waterjet engines, capable of 52 knots, roughly 60 miles per hour on flat water, carrying either 2 Naser-1 anti-ship cruise missiles or a single torpedo tube. Alongside them, smaller Ashura-class boats carrying rocket-propelled grenades, DSHK 12.7mm heavy machine guns, and in several cases, nothing but speed. Their job is not to shoot. Their job is to exist in the same water at the same time in numbers large enough to make targeting decisions take 4 seconds longer than they should. The PACAP costs approximately $500,000 per unit. The Naser, 1 missile it carries costs roughly $200,000. The entire 60-boat swarm approaching the Eisenhower that morning totals approximately $1.5 million. Roughly the cost of a single training sortie for one of those Super Hornets burning holes in the sky overhead. This is not a naval battle. This is an economics problem, wearing a naval battle's uniform. The Eisenhower is bracketed by her escorts. The guided missile cruiser USS Vela Gulf, CG-72, to the north. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Gravely, DDG-107, riding 3 miles to the southeast. Each escort carries 96 vertical launch cells loaded with a mix of SM-2 Block 3A surface-to-air missiles at $2.1 million each and Tomahawk cruise missiles at $2.2 million each. Together, the 3 ships hold roughly $4.6 billion of American hardware. The boats coming toward them cost about $25,000 apiece. Neither side has illusions about what the other is doing. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, maintains 14 bases along the Iranian coastline from Bandar Abbas to Jask, roughly 200 nautical miles of coastline, and every one of those bases tracks every American warship that enters the strait. The Americans know they are being watched. The Iranians know the Americans know. The entire transit is a mutual performance of awareness, and it has been this way since 1988. What makes this morning different is the scale. At 0651 local time, the Eisenhower's Combat Information Center logs 14 new surface contacts emerging from the eastern shoreline. 4 minutes later, the count is 23. By 0658, it is 41. Every one of them headed southwest into the shipping lanes at speeds between 35 and 52 knots. The watch officer has a classification problem. The Strait of Hormuz sees roughly 17 million barrels of oil pass through it every day, carried by tankers, serviced by tugs, surrounded by fishing vessels and Coast Guard cutters from Oman and the UAE. On any given morning, the surface picture contains 200 to 400 contacts. Most of them are harmless. The rules of engagement require positive identification before any weapon release. A fishing boat moving at 40 knots in the same direction as 59 other boats is not a valid target until it demonstrates hostile intent or hostile action. Every sailor in that CIC knows what happened to Iran Air Flight 655 in 1988, when the cruiser USS Vincennes misidentified an Airbus A300 civilian airliner and killed 290 people. That memory is baked into the rules of engagement like scar tissue. So the watch officer does what the rules demand. He reports up the chain. He requests the carrier launch its alert helicopter. He requests the Gravely close to intercept distance. He does everything right, and every second he spends doing it right, the lead boats get 900 yards closer. The SBS-67 surface search radar and the SBQ-9B lower frequency system can see these boats. The problem is not detection. The problem is that 60 small fiberglass contacts in a strait full of commercial traffic look, on a radar screen, like a bad morning, not an attack. What the IRGCN commander overseeing this operation from a hardened bunker 8 miles inland from Bandar Abbas designed was not a naval battle. He designed a decision crisis. The swarm's purpose is not to sink the Eisenhower. No one in Tehran believes 60 speedboats will sink a nuclear carrier. The swarm's purpose is to force 5,000 Americans to make 60 targeting decisions in under 3 minutes while transiting a choke point too narrow to maneuver, too shallow to accelerate, and too politically sensitive to abandon. If one of those decisions is wrong, if a fishing boat burns, if a civilian dhow takes a burst of 20 mm, the operation has already succeeded. The weapon is not the boat. The weapon is the decision. What the IRGCN commander did not know was that 45 minutes before his first boats cleared the harbor at Jask, a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft flying at 28,000 feet, 140 nautical miles to the southwest, had already catalogued every boat in every harbor along the Iranian coast. Its APS-154 advanced airborne sensor, a synthetic aperture radar capable of imaging surface contacts at ranges exceeding 200 nautical miles with resolution fine enough to count outboard engines, had transmitted a complete pre-transit surface picture to 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain at 0601 local time. When the boats began moving at 0620, the departure was tracked in near real-time by a second asset, an MQ-4C Triton unmanned aircraft, wingspan 131 feet, cruising at 56,000 feet, 190 nautical miles to the south. Its APS-3 multifunction active sensor had been painting the Iranian coastline continuously for 11 hours. Every boat had a track number before its crew finished morning prayers. The decision crisis the IRGCN commander designed required confusion. What he got was confirmation. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopter lifts off the Eisenhower's flight deck at 0703 local time. 90 seconds to reach 500 feet. The sensor operator begins classifying contacts from west to east using the APS-153 multimode radar and the MX-15 electro-optical turret. Each classification takes approximately 8 seconds. At 8 seconds per contact and 41 contacts at last count, full classification will take roughly 5.5 minutes. By then, the lead boats will be inside 4 nautical miles of the carrier. 5 nautical miles to the north, the Vela Gulf's captain does not wait. He orders his ship to 25 knots on an intercept heading northeast, placing 10,000 tons of guided missile cruiser between the swarm and the Eisenhower's beam. The Vela Gulf carries the Spy-1B phased array radar, 4 fixed panels, each scanning a 90-degree quadrant, designed to track ballistic missiles in the upper atmosphere. It was built to find warheads falling from space at Mach 15, roughly 11,500 miles per hour. Right now, it is trying to distinguish attack craft from fishing boats moving at 60 miles per hour on a surface full of whitecaps. Like using a space telescope to read a license plate in a parking lot at dusk. At 0706 local time, the CIC count reaches 53 surface contacts inbound. 7 more have appeared from the direction of Q-Stack. The swarm has arranged itself in a rough crescent. Its leading edge 6 nautical miles from the Eisenhower. Its trailing boats still 12 nautical miles out. The crescent shape is not accidental. It forces the American escorts to choose which arc to cover. Defending the north exposes the south. Defending the east exposes the northwest. There is no geometry that covers all 60 boats with 3 ships. At 0708, the Eisenhower's captain orders the carrier to increase speed to 12 knots and begin a turn to starboard, angling the bow toward wider water to the south. At 12 knots, a Nimitz-class carrier needs 3,200 yards to complete a 90-degree turn. The shipping lane is 6 miles wide. The turn will eat a third of the available water. Back in the CIC, the intelligence picture from the Poseidon and the Triton has already pre-identified 14 PACAP-class fast attack craft, 22 Ashura-class boats, and 24 unclassified small craft. The Seahawk has now confirmed weapons mounts on 11 of the lead boats. Under the standing rules of engagement, a boat carrying visible weapons moving directly at a U.S. warship at attack speed constitutes demonstrated hostile intent. The watch officer does not need to wait for a missile launch. At 0710 local time, the Gravely fires the first shots. Not a missile. Not the 5-inch gun. The forward Mark 38 Mod 2 chain gun opens at 2,200 yards on 3 lead boats approaching from the east. Each 25mm round costs roughly $35. The first burst, 20 rounds across 4 seconds, tears the bow off a PACAP-class boat at an angle that flips the wreckage sideways into the boat running beside it. 2 boats removed for $700 in ammunition. A ship worth $2.2 billion just defended itself with the cost of a decent dinner. The swarm reacts. It was trained to react. 18 boats break south, accelerating to 52 knots on a heading that will put them behind the Eisenhower stern within 4 minutes. 12 continue toward the Gravely, spacing out to 300-yard intervals to complicate targeting. The remaining boats compress the northern crescent toward the Vela Gulf. At 0712 local time, the first Nazer-1 anti-ship cruise missile launches from a PACAP-class boat in the eastern group, 4.1 nautical miles from the Gravely. The missile drops off its rail, ignites its solid rocket booster, and accelerates to Mach 0.98, roughly 680 miles per hour, at an altitude of 15 feet above the wave tops. Time to impact at that range, approximately 22 seconds. The Gravelease radar locks it before the booster finishes burning. The Phalanx CWS, a white dome the size of a dumpster bolted to the ship's superstructure, fully automated, no human in the loop, swivels and fires. Its 20mm tungsten rounds create a wall of metal in the missile's flight path. The Nazer, one flies into that wall at 680 miles per hour and disintegrates 800 yards from the ship's hull. Total engagement time, 6 seconds. Total ammunition cost, approximately $2,400. The missile it killed cost $200,000. The economics just inverted, and this time they favor the Americans. But the Phalanx carries 1,550 rounds. At 4,500 rounds per minute, that is roughly 20 seconds of trigger time total. One engagement might use 300 rounds. If 5 missiles come simultaneously from different bearings, the math stops working. The IRGC doctrine calls this a saturation salvo. The idea is as old as naval warfare. Throw more arrows than the other side has shields. 3 more Nazer, 1 missiles launch within 8 seconds of each other. All sea skimming, all on different bearings. 2 aimed at the Vela Gulf, 1 at the Gravely. The Vela Gulf's captain makes a decision that will appear in every naval warfare postmortem for the next decade. He does not fire SM-2 missiles. An SM-2 Block 3A costs $2.1 million and is designed to kill aircraft at ranges up to 90 nautical miles. Using it against a $200,000 anti-ship missile at 4 miles is not a weapons employment decision. It is a tax on poor planning. Instead, he relies on his 2 Phalanx mounts and orders the SLQ-32 electronic warfare system into active jamming, a wall of electromagnetic noise across the frequency bands the Nazer 1's active radar seeker uses for terminal guidance. The Nazer 1 seeker head is a derivative of Chinese technology from the early 2000s. Against a modern naval jammer, it has the electronic resilience of a garage door opener. The first missile loses lock at 2,100 yards. It corkscrews right, hits the surface, detonates on impact 400 yards off the cruiser's port beam. The blast kicks a geyser 60 feet high. The second holds lock 3 seconds longer before the forward Phalanx engages and destroys it at 600 yards. The third was targeted poorly and passes 1,200 yards astern without the seeker ever acquiring the ship. The fourth finds the Vela Gulf. It strikes the port side amidships, 6 feet above the waterline, just forward of the number 2 exhaust stack. The 330-pound warhead detonates on contact. The blast tears a hole 12 feet by 8 feet in the hull plating and starts a fire in the auxiliary machinery room. 3 sailors are killed instantly. 11 more are wounded. The cruiser lists 2 degrees to port and begins taking water. She does not stop fighting. Her Aegis system stays online. Her gun keeps firing. But a $25,000 fiberglass boat carrying a $200,000 missile just put a hole in a billion-dollar cruiser. The IRGCN will call that a victory. They will be telling the truth. For miles above the strait, 2F divided by a -18E Super Hornets from VFA 86, the Sidewinders, have been holding in a racetrack pattern since 0655. They were launched as a precautionary combat air patrol before the swarm was fully detected. Each aircraft carries 4 AIM-9X Sidewinder heat-seeking missiles at $472,000 each and a 20mm M61A2 Vulcan cannon with 578 rounds. The AIM-9X was designed to kill fighter jets pulling 9 Gs at Mach 2, 2 times the speed of sound. Using it against a wooden boat doing 60 miles per hour is a sentence that belongs in a budget hearing, not a combat report. The cannon works just fine. At 0714 local time, both Super Hornets roll in on the southern arc of the swarm, the 18 boats that broke south to circle behind the carrier. The lead aircraft descends to 1,200 feet and begins a strafing run. The M61A2 fires at 6,000 rounds per minute. The pilot fires a 2-second burst. 200 rounds walk across 3 boats in a line. The first comes apart. The second catches fire and begins circling with a dead helmsman. The third loses both engines and goes dead in the water. The second Super Hornet hits the southern arc from the opposite bearing 4 seconds later. Same result. 2 more boats destroyed. 1 disabled. The southern threat is shredded in 11 seconds of combined gun time. 11 seconds. At 0716, the Gravelease embarked helicopter fires 2 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles at boats in the Eastern Remnant. The Hellfire costs $117,000 per shot. Both boats vanish. The math in every direction keeps producing the same answer. The Americans can do this indefinitely. The swarm cannot. The IRGCN commander in his bunker near Bandar Abbas, watching through coastal radar and fragmentary UHF radio reports, sees what is happening. In 6 minutes, his swarm has lost 14 boats without forcing the Eisenhower to stop, turn back, or abort the transit. The decision crisis he engineered has been answered. The answer came before his first boat cleared the harbor. The northern group begins to scatter. 8 boats turn east toward Iranian waters. 6 hold course toward the damaged Vela Gulf and fire their remaining ordnance. 2 more Nasr-1 missiles and a salvo of 107mm unguided rockets from an Ashura-class boat. The rockets have a range of roughly 5 miles and carry 4-pound warheads against a 10,000-ton cruiser. One of the 12 hits the Vela Gulf's bridge wing, wounding 2 more sailors and destroying an exterior communications antenna. The remaining Nasr-1 missiles are destroyed by the Gravely's Phalanx from 4 miles south. Both detonate over open water. The remaining 8 boats in the northern group implement their pre-planned disengagement protocol. Weapons go overboard. Rocket launchers splash. Machine guns follow. In under 30 seconds, 8 attack craft become 8 unarmed fishing boats having a strange morning. The rules of engagement close like a vault door. No weapons, no hostile action, no hostile intent. The Americans track them, cannot fire. Watch them slow to 10 knots and head northeast toward Iranian waters. Somewhere in a Pentagon briefing room, this particular sequence is already becoming a slideshow. At 0719 local time, 2 more Super Hornets arrive over the northern group. One fires an AIM-9X Sidewinder at a paycap that has just completed a missile launch. $472,000 of infrared-guided air-to-air missile, designed to pull 60 Gs chasing a supersonic fighter jet, drops to sea level and hits a 46-foot fiberglass hull doing 52 knots. The Sidewinder's 20-pound blast fragmentation warhead, sized to shatter a titanium airframe, erases the boat entirely. Nothing remains on the surface of the strait but a scorch mark and settling foam. The second Super Hornet uses its cannon. 3 bursts, 3 boats. $42,000. By 0722 local time, 12 minutes after the first chain gun burst from the Gravely, 9 minutes after the paycap fired its first missile, the swarm is functionally destroyed. 23 boats sunk or disabled. 8 disarmed and retreating. The remainder scattering east at full speed toward Iranian territorial waters. The Vela Gulf is damaged but operational, holding 18 knots with a 2-degree list and a fire contained to 1 compartment. The Eisenhower has completed her turn and is accelerating south toward the Gulf of Oman at 22 knots with her air wings cycling overhead in stacked combat air patrols. The Eisenhower clears the strait at 0814 local time. Behind her, the Vela Gulf limps south at reduced speed, escorted by the Gravely. The final accounting looks like the footnote to a very expensive argument. 23 Iranian boats destroyed. Iranian material losses estimated at $8.6 million including missiles expended. American ordnance expended across